Okay, what we're going to do in this video is get started on a project, a lab, if you will, um, on a shopping cart built in React. And, um, you know, there's without a doubt some theory that has not yet been covered. Um, so as we go through building this project, and then we'll cover those bases because there's a lot more to learn in React, and some of those things are outlined in the bullets. But where we want to start is with a GitHub repo. This will be a repo that you share with me, and so let's go ahead to github.com and create a new repository. And I'm the owner. Notice I'm kind of keeping the convention of no uppercase, underscores for the new words. We'll make it public. Sure, readme. Kind of the same thing. This is built on Node, so we're going to set the get ignored to Node and MIT license. And get that URL. And I'm going to make sure to clone it locally. I'm going to use TortoiseGit to clone React underscore shopping cart. Okay, so I've got one that's got hyphens. That's not the one that I just cloned. The one that's underscore is this one here. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Trust the authors. And that's where we're going to start. You will go ahead and in your settings add me as a collaborator. Evan Gudmestead is my username, so full name together right here. Go ahead and add me as a collaborator when you get to this point so that I can grade your lab when it's time to do so. And then we run the installation command, npx create -react -app dot. This will take a minute. I'll pause while it's doing its thing. Okay, give you a little yellow, hey, we renamed your old README because we created a new README. That's fine. And you want to boot it up with npm start or npm run start. And because I still have something running on 3000, it'll say, hey, yeah, let's go on another port. And so it chose 3001 since my last project was on 3000. This is our template. Now, you could always go into your task manager. I hit Control-Shift-Escape is the hotkey to get into your task manager. And a lot of times you could go down into finding the process that's running and ending that process that's running on the port 3000. Typically it's called node, but I'm not seeing it right here. Sometimes I overlook things, but it doesn't matter. It's running on port 3001, and that's where it is. Now, let's bring up our code base. Here's our index.html, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in Bootstrap with a CDN. It's kind of my preferred way. So I'm going to go get bootstrap.com because, again, what we're creating is this shopping cart, and I'm going to use Bootstrap and get it looking similar to that. End goal. And so, you know, when you're getting into React, and oftentimes, you know, you'll hear things like, oh, you need to think like a React developer, and so you need to start visualizing things in components. Now, there's not a whole lot going on here. You could break this down into 3 components. The first component being the app is kind of the root component, and then a shopping cart component, which includes this heading and this number of items over here and a button, right? So the shopping cart component, and then you have items, individual items in here. So that third component would be a shopping cart item. So you could see an app component that holds all of it. You could see a shopping cart component, and you could see a shopping cart item component. You know, if you wanted to get rid of app and just have the 2 components being the shopping cart itself and then the cart items, you know, I could see that being the case. But you can kind of see here a cart item component and a cart, the cart itself would be called a cart list. So that's kind of the direction we're heading. Again, it's going to be Bootstrap friendly. So I'm going to go into the docs of Bootstrap. And I'm just going to pull in the CDN right here. Now this is the CDN for the Bootstrap CSS. Now there are other ways of, let me close, oh, there's my other app. Let me just close that. That was the hello world I just finished up. Oh. Now if I stop it and run it, let's see if it's on port 3000. Yeah, there it goes. Okay. So the CSS, I'm going to put that up in the head. I'm linking to the CSS in the head. And I'll go back. And let's grab the JavaScript CDN. And that's going to be just before the closing body. So there's the closing body. Let's save that and refresh our front end. And if I inspect, there's my link to my CDN. There's my other link to my CDN. So linking to the Bootstrap JavaScript and the CSS, and under console, no errors with loading anything. And so now the problem with hard coding it this way is it's always going to be version 5.3. You can install Bootstrap with NPM. Kind of show you here. Let's see on the docs. Here we go, under download, under package managers, npm install bootstrap 5.3. So you can install Bootstrap that way, and then you could use your package manager to maintain the version control of what version of Bootstrap. So there's that method as well you could consider. And I'm sure we'll do that at some point, install Bootstrap that way. So let's close index inside of source. Again, we've got our index.js. It brings in app. App.js has all of this. And so let's just kind of go hello world inside of a div, just to kind of replicate what we did in the last video. And we've got hello world. And if I inspect that, hello world, we are getting some CSS being applied, but I do see some Bootstrap CSS being applied down here, this reboot S CSS. If I uncheck the font family, I can see the font change, and this is the Bootstrap CSS, so I know Bootstrap's in there and working. If I wanted to be more thorough with that, let's go ahead and create our own component. Now, you know, we're gonna kind of create a cart item first. Cart item.js. And this is a function, cart item, curly's return, and export default cart item. And let's do div classes call do a little Bootstrap grid div. Let's do boot. Now, okay. Teaching opportunity. I'm very usually you see class. Okay, div class of something. Notice I'm doing class name. Class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. It makes a class for instantiation, right? Object oriented. So since JSX, what we're writing is a combo of HTML and JavaScript, the attribute is class name in our CSS. So that's something you see quite a bit. And so, you know, do a little Bootstrap grid here, have a row, and in there we have 3 columns, call 1, call 2, call 3. And so here's our function called cart item. All it is a Bootstrap grid of 3 columns. And we export the cart item. Then inside of app.js, let's just load our cart item. This is our component. We're no longer using the logo. And inside of our index CSS, I don't want any of these fonts, so I'm just going to delete this. Kind of leave that empty. Therefore, we can kind of delete that import of the CSS here on the index.js. Okay, so again, index.js is where we start. We call app. App calls on cart item. Cart item is just a Bootstrap container. There we go. We got 3 columns. Call 1, call 2, call 3. I really want a kind of a container around all of my columns. And I don't like this little horizontal scroll bar, but let's do this. So here, class name row. Let's do another div on the outside of that, class name of Bootstrap container. Let's add a Bootstrap container around all 3 of these. So the parent is that div. There we go. Okay, now we gotta have a container going around the outskirts. I like that better. There's no horizontal scrolling. Call 1, 2, 3. And because it's Bootstrap, we get some different automatic resizing. I'm just going to put everything kind of down the middle in column 2. But this is just our start. Back to the mock-up. Here. Okay, so this is a card item. So you can kind of see a card item has a text box, it has a quantity, and it has a couple of buttons. So each card item kind of has 4 pieces. And so we can break down each cart item into 4 pieces, in which case, again, this Bootstrap, you know, the idea is that your columns add up to 12. And so I'm going to add a 4th column. Oops. And they're all column medium 3, but now I should have 4 columns on a row. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and maybe each card item has 1 row with 4 pieces there. Of course, if you want them to take up different portions, then this could, you know, these can add up to 12 differently. But for right now, each one is equal portions. And let's see, inputs, type of text. And let's just, I might have to refactor this a bunch, but we'll call this text name. Now here's the problem with an ID like this, right? So a cart item, the cart item is going to have, you know, you might have multiple cart items. So at the end of the day, we have 1 cart item, but probably you're going to have, you know, 4 cart items. Okay, so giving unique IDs here, you just can't statically code the ID like this because they have to be unique. So I'm just going to leave that off for now. I'm just going to have an input type of text, and like such. Then what was next? These, at this case, need a single parent, so I'll put one of those React fragments, as they're called, that have multiple cart items. Okay, so we could see a text box there. Now, let's make that a Bootstrap text box. And inside of it says the word hat. So here, class name, a Bootstrap text box is form-control. So if I add that class name, you can see that those text boxes are formatted differently. I also see I don't want these things butt up right up to one another, so I'm going to add maybe some margin to my row, MT-3, some margin. Okay, to kind of separate those out a little bit. And then we have a span for a quantity. So I'll just kind of hard code the number 2 there. And this one would say something like hat to This is a button, class name of button, button primary, with a text that says something like add. And you would put this word add inside of a span. Something like that. Okay, so we can see we got Bootstrap working. We could see we got a text box. Interesting behavior. You can't change the text in there. We'll explain that. We got some labels. We got a button that says add. We got a button that says remove. And we do have a component. And the span there, there's a text center. So a class of text center. Let's see if adding the class of text center gets that more where I would want it. This is okay. It's not, but that's okay. Okay, I get to this point where we want to actually introduce what's called state and hooks. And so the state of your page is just another way of saying like the data that's on your page. And so, you know, I have this data that we kind of have statically coded here into our controls, value of hat. But we want that to be stored in state, and the way that we do that is was called the use state hook is used to store data. And so it's essentially we're creating our variables here. And so I'm going to import use state from React. And so this is a function, again, called use state, that's going to allow us to create a variable. And so I realize this is brand new, so we haven't done this before. And store that variable in a React hook. All that's just a way of saying of working with data in React. And so, just gotta get the syntax pulled up on my other screen here real quick. Okay, so inside of your function is going to be where we're going to create this state variable. This is a variable, and this is different, right? So I've got brackets here called item name, and we're going to say set item name equals use state and inside of these parentheses you put the initial value of what the item name is. Now this is a string, and so I'm just going to say hat. Okay, so to break this line down, doing a couple of things. This function use state returns two things. It returns a value that's stored into item name, and it returns a mutator method called set item name. So again, use state method returns two items. It returns a value for the item name variable, which is initialized right here, which is hat. It also returns a function to modify that data called set item name. This is where we get to say this is kind of a declarative thing, in that, hey, I'm not going to tell you how to update the data inside of this text box here. We're just going to put item name right here. For right now, it just doesn't. This control doesn't care about how, the implementation details on how to get the item name, into that. We're just saying, hey, I want you to display the data called item name right here. And so let's see. Okay, we refactored that, and it looks the same, which is good. Nothing's breaking. So we are now storing that data in a hook inside of React. Now, anytime you call set item name, set item name will be used to modify the data inside of item name. And let's do that here. We're going to say on change okay. So here we're calling the method that we created called set item name, and it's using this event object. So anytime this onChange event is called, now onChange, that goes back to vanilla JavaScript. It's an event listener. Anytime the user changes what's in that text box, it fires the onChange event handler. So we're saying anytime the data changes inside of that text box, run this code, this JavaScript code right here. The JavaScript code has an event object, EVT, which has details about the event, such as the value of the current target. The current target, in this case, being the text box, and the value that the user is typing. So if this works, this is going to be how we modify what the user has in there, which is the word hat and the item name. So if I refresh, you now notice we can change what's inside of our text box. Now what's interesting is that this is now being stored. This is being stored in my hook. What's cool about that is that now I have this variable called item name, and maybe I just put this like in an H1, and I say item name. And so here, if I refresh, it says hat. Anytime I change this, it changes the data, and you get the idea. And so again, this is very different. I understand this is just kind of a different way of coding, and that is React. This is a learning curve, and the only way to go about it is to start doing it. Well, that's our item name. And that's cool. Let's do another one for item quantity. Set item quantity equals use state, and this is the value 2. So like we got 2 hats, item quantity. So now instead of the number 2, we're going to say item quantity. Okay, now we're going to modify item quantity when we click the button, right? So right now we have a button that says add. So let's say on click equals EVT. We're going to call set item quantity, passing it the, I don't know, item quantity plus plus, or maybe we'll say plus plus item quantity. And so localhost 3000. Okay, got it. Let's take a look. Now I was, if you don't code this every day, you forget. I've seen this error before. There's always a way in React to code this. You have to code it a little differently. You just can't say, okay, increase item quantity by 1. Let me recall this syntax here. 1 second. Yeah, credit to Grant, who's just trying some things. Just changing item quantity plus plus to item quantity plus 1. Now, it's really interesting that the plus plus didn't work. Oh, actually, no, yeah, as soon as we hit plus plus, it doesn't work. But if you do item quantity, because the idea is that you're adding 1. So set item quantity plus 1. Save it. Localhost. Oh, keeps defaulting to 5003. By the way, if you have this and you don't want that, you could hold Shift Delete and it'll clear out that memory cache. So let's click add. Now it goes up. There we go. So hat add item goes up by 1. Of course, then remove becomes the opposite. And here's our button on click. Curly's says enter JavaScript land. Here's our event object. We're basically making an anonymous function that calls set item quantity to item quantity minus 1. Okay, again, we're going to have to refactor this a couple times because this is just kind of getting us a start. But you can see that is allowing us to both change those individual pieces. Now, obviously, the next step is, wait a minute, these need to be different items. And since these need to be different items, you can't keep the data, and right now, the keeper of the data, if you will, is in the cart item. Each cart item, is a hat. Well, every cart item is not a hat. You need a parent container that kind of stores the data, and then you need to send that data down. And so what we have to learn, now that we have data and we understand this concept of hooks, is we need to learn how to pass data from a parent to a child. And so that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to kind of refactor this a little bit so that the data is owned by the parent. We don't have a parent component right now, but it's going to be owned by the cart list item. and then we're going to send that data down. We're going from the cart item into from the cart list into the cart item. And so I'll go ahead and right now, something you'll probably see in the future, I'll create a folder called components. I've seen that in a lot of tutorials where you just have this components folder and you put everything in there. Just for a little organization. We're not going to do that for right now. And right now our app calls on our 2 cart items. Instead, we'll have app call our cart list. So let's go ahead and create our cart list.js function cart list return export default cart list. And our cart list will have cart items in it. Cart item 1, cart item 2. Okay, so kind of follow me through the woods. Now the app is just going to call on cart lists. So app is the parent with 1 child. Cart list. Oh, it doesn't know what cart list is. Let's see if we can get IntelliSense. Cart list, click on it. So we bring it in. Okay, so app calls cart list. Inside of cart list, we call 2 cart items. For now, each cart items has the same piece of data, so we should have refactored that. And we do need 1 parent on cart list. So cart list. Here we'll do a fragment. Okay, so now there's a cart list that's essentially invisible, but nothing is broken. And I need to stop closing that window. So what I want to be able to do is create my hooks inside of my cart list. And, the first thought would be something like this. And I'll go down this path and then I'll refactor it just to show you kind of as we build this up. We could do something like we need to bring in useState. That's our hook. Import useState from React. And we could do something like const item 1 name set item 1 name. I don't know about you, but as a programmer, anytime you're manually doing this is like a flag. Because right away what I think is we should have an array of things, right? Not just having item 1 name, item 2 name, item 3 name. Use state hat const item 1 so I don't think I'm actually even going to go down this path very deep because you could see how terrible this would be. Anytime you get into the thinking habit of like, why am I going to have to uniquely identify each item with its own ID? Well, that's what an array is used for. Arrays have numbers automatically. Number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, on and so forth. But let me show this. I don't want to do it, but I do. Let's go back to the mockup. I've got a hat and I've got a tie and I've got a belt. So I'll just do a hat and a tie. Tie. Item to quantity. Okay, so we got an item 1 name and an item 1 quantity, item 2 name, item 2 quantity. Well, it turns out, we're essentially, when we're making these components, right, we're making these custom components. Turns out not only can we, give their name, the name of it is the tag name, if you will, you can also give them custom properties. So I'm going to say name equals forget if this goes in quotes. Nope, I'm just going to say item 1 name. This might need to go in quotes. Curlies? Yeah, curlies. So now I've got a name property that should, now what is this doing? It's going to send item 1 name down from my cart list into my cart item. So I'll send this one name, item 2 name. So we had to kind of take the data up from the child into a parent so that we can send different pieces of data back down, right? And that way every cart item doesn't have the same data, right? That's called hoisting. Hoisting the data is a name for that. So what that allows us to do is now in this child, we no longer need the data here. But instead, the way this is going to be sent in is with this parameter called props. Notice there's a parameter called props here that I added on line 4. That used to be an empty parenthesis. So props are this concept of sending data from a parent down to a child. And you can't send from like sibling to sibling, it is down from the parent down to the child. That's kind of the way that you can send data. Well, now there's no more item name, right? Instead, so we have to kind of follow through this. Instead, item name is gone. Instead is now props dot, if I go back here, we call this name. It's props dot name is how we get to it. Okay, now I'm going to kind of comment out this line of code right here. By the way, the hotkey is Control /, right? Because I don't want these to, I want to comment this out, comment this out, comment this out, because I don't, that code I haven't refactored yet. But basically, I want to send the data down from my cart list down into my cart item through this concept called props. And I'm going to make that be displayed inside of an H1. Now it says item quantity is not defined inside of cart item. I need to comment that line out. Forgot that one. Okay. Now I see hat and tie inside of my H1, so I can see the data being sent down. Okay. So we really don't need the word inside of an H1, right? What I want to do is I want to get this line back working. So let me take this top line, take that comment out. Remember, item name is now coming from the parent, which is props dot name. But in order to change the name, we need to pass in the method as well. And so, again, this is a little bit weird, but what we're going to do is we're going to pass the method from the parent to the child through props, very similar to the way that we pass the data. So we pass the data through props. We're also going to pass the method set item name through props. So if I go back to cart list, right? So here's set item one name. So this is the method. And the attribute, again, we get to make it up, the name of it. I'll call it, you know, sometimes you see this. You see set item one name equal to, and then here you pass the actual name set item one name. I found this very confusing when I was starting, because it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? The attribute that you're creating here, set item one name, is what's associated on, you know, this is what's received. Just like we said props.name, now we can call props.set item one name. And then you're sending into this prop the function set item one name. So I found it a little bit useful to kind of like call this something different. You know, maybe set item name, but it is pretty typically set item one name. Like, I've seen that called the same thing. So I'll just do that for now to keep it the same. What that allows me to do back in cart item, now I could say props dot set item one name. EVT current target dot value. Okay, so I've refactored that to send both the data down through props and the method down through props. And let's see, now I can see that I've got the data here, and it is letting me, oh, okay. As soon as I went to change that there, it said set item one name is not a function. Because I didn't do this here. So here, maybe we do call this set item name. This will be set item name is the prop, but we're going to pass the set item to name here. I mean, I guess we just call it set item name. So here we pass it the item one name to change the item one name, and here we pass the set item two name to change item two name. So if I refresh, hats, ties. There we go. Refresh, starts off with hat, starts off with tie. So we're keeping the property named, but we're passing different functions to it to change different props. Again, you know, there should be little yellow flags, at least there are in my brain, going, hey, you know, what if I've got 10 items? I don't want 10 variables. You know, instead I would have an array of variables, and that would simplify our code a little bit here. Let's refactor this then. Item quantity is now props. We don't have the item quantity. So send down to cart item QTY equals item one quantity. Actually, I'll call it quantity. Quantity equals item one quantity. And on this one, quantity equals item 2 quantity. And I'll call this set item quantity equal to set item 1 quantity, set item quantity equal to set item 2 quantity. So you got to pass all 4 things down: the name and the way to change it, the quantity and the way to change it for each item. So now the item 1 quantity, let's kind of go back here. This is props dot quantity. Refresh that. I could see I've got different quantities. Let's bring this back in. And this is props dot set quantity, I believe I called it. Again, going back here, set item quantity. Props dot set item quantity. And this is now props dot quantity plus 1. Okay, and of course refactoring this. This is now props dot set item quantity props dot quantity minus 1. So you're just calling that function, sending in the current quantity minus 1. Looking good. Looking good. Console's clean. And kind of now, back on our cart list, we've refactored this into different items. The direction and kind of like the last refactoring of this is where we're going to have an array of objects, and each object is an item that has a name and a quantity, and probably we want to set it up with like an identifier, like a unique ID of some sort, maybe a nano ID. And so that's where we're headed. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So in our cart list, instead of having item 1 name, item 2 name, item 3 name, so on and so forth, let's comment those out. It's going to break that. Let's stop this and npm install nano ID. That'll help us get unique identifiers for our data. And so let's import nano ID from nano ID. And now let's store an array of objects in use state. Const items. So our array of objects is going to be called items, and set items is our mutator method. Use state, here's our array of objects. Object 1, generate a unique ID, name of hat, quantity 2, comma 1, 2, 3, tie, belt, okay. Now, let's hold off on the mutators, set item name, and set item quantity. And I'm going to hold off on those properties. I'm going to delete that, delete that, delete that, delete that. Again, just refactoring this. I'm walking us through kind of building this up. So all we're going to show is the name and the quantity. And the way to get to the name now is items. Well, this is an array. In fact, I'm just gonna do, yeah. Okay. So there's just getting the quantity, hat and tie. I guess since we're doing it, we might as well do belt. Okay, now that's coming down through props. And we have a value. I'm going to hold off on the on change. Again, we're going to have to so doesn't like class name having that capital letter all of a sudden. Makes me feel like I got a mistake somewhere in here. Okay, so I'm gonna just pull this over here. Cart list, 3 items. Cart item, display the name coming across in the name and the quantity coming across in the quantity. And I'm gonna hold off on that. Hold off on that. Now let me run it. npm start. Let's see what's broken. Okay, hat, tie, belt, 3, 2, 3, 1. Obviously we can't change anything. But it's working. And this is fine. When you know that there's like 3 items, you could just display each one. However, a lot of times you don't know how many items there are. For example, kind of going back here, you could do a for each loop and say for each item, put out a cart item, and using a for each loop kind of in here to do that. It is common to use the map function of arrays instead of a for each loop. So map function in JavaScript. And so here we have an array. and we say, hey, on our array, dot map each element and multiply it by 2. So 1 becomes 2, 4 becomes 8, 9 becomes 18. So array.map is kind of a way just to loop over an array and perform some action to each element. And so inside of React, when we want to loop over our elements, we're going to wind up using this map function to do that. And so let's close. And set items is an interesting function, right? Because we're going to use set items to be able to modify the data in our array. Let me take a minute here to think about something. Okay, let's do that. Let's map. So instead of doing this, passing all 3 card items, let's do, so let's introduce some JavaScript. We're going to say items.map. And let me pull up the syntax of that. Items.map, your item, arrow, and then what do you do with each item? With each item, we're going to put it inside of a cart item. Cart item name equals item.name. Quantity equals item.quantity. So here's a map function to map each item into a cart item, passing its name and quantity. And that's a little bit better than, because here we know that there's 3, but what if there's 100? This is one function that would loop through all 100. Localhost 3000, and there we go. Okay, I wanted to point this out, that when you start using a map and looping over your arrays, this is a common error that you'll see. This one right here. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And so, we're mapping over our items. And so each one needs a unique key property. In other words, a unique way to identify it. Because it's basically how React is going to keep track of one item to the next is with its unique key. And so what I'll do is I'll set a key equal to, and luckily we have an ID, item.id. So this key prop is going to help React keep track of all the different cart items inside of our cart list. So now if I come back and refresh, that error is gone. It says, warning, you provided a value prop to a form field without an on-change handler. That's something that we're going to work our way through. Okay, the next part is a little tricky, and I highlighted a piece of code here that really wouldn't work. You know how we sent the mutator methods down to the child, and we were changing individual items with those mutator methods before, and that was working. But the problem here is that, well, you'd have to send the entire items array down as well. And so, set items equals set items, that's not really going to work, because once you have this mutator, you have to know which item that you're modifying. Like, that's ultimately down, something. If you're going to call a mutator method that is sent to modify a bunch of items, you have to be able to say which one to modify. So I'm going to write a method here called onNameChange. And it's going to take an event object and an individual item. And I'm going to save here, close. Another popular NPM library is called Lodash. And so Lodash is a popular NPM dependency that helps you do some common things that aren't built into JavaScript. And so there is a map function built into JavaScript, so you could take an array.map. But there's also a Lodash map that works a little bit differently. So on this name change, I'm going to say const new name. Okay, kind of similar to what we did before. Let's read the value of the current target, store it in a variable called new name. And then we're going to call set items. We're going to call set items from within this function. And then inside of here, we're going to call the Lodash, and it's done with underscore map. So this is Lodash's map method. We're going to iterate over the items array. And for each item, we are going to return, it's kind of like an if the ID equals the item ID that's passed in. This is a ternary operator. Does the item.id, let's call this x. Does x ID, so does this item's ID match the item's ID that's passed in? If it is, then let's spread the item and increase the quantity by 1. Plus plus x.quantity. Otherwise, just return the item. And so this is it's an interesting line of code. Let's see, there's the end of set items. We got to end the map. So that's the end of map, then that ends set items. We're looping through items. Where some my parentheses are off somewhere. Oh, there's an extra. There we go. In order for that to work, we need to import underscore from Lodash. Okay, let me walk through this line again. When you call this function, you pass in the event object and an individual item. You loop through your items array, and you check to see that does that first element match the item ID that's passed in. So this is like an if statement. If the one object's ID equals the other object's ID, if it does, then this is the problem that I was having before, where I was increasing the quantity. You just can't do plus plus quantity. Here we spread the item, we create a new item, we spread the item, and then we take the quantity property and increase it by 1. Spread all the item property, increase the item property by 1. Otherwise, you keep that item the same. So now down here, again, we're not doing this set items equals set items. We're doing on name change, that's our function that we just created, equals curly's EVT arrow on name change EVT and that individual item that we're mapping out. We're not done. Let me look at this real quick. New name. Wait a minute. I got crossed. I was going from names to quantities. This is name colon new name. That's what we're not messing with quantities here. So read the new name, set items, if the IDs match, spread the element, change the name. Otherwise, keep the element the same. And now we should be able to go into cart item and say props, let's see, on change equals curly's EVT arrow props on name change Okay, let me bring it up. See what's broke. That's good. We can change the names. No errors in the console. So the tricky part on this one, there's a couple of things that are tricky. You know, kind of going back to, you just don't send set items down. without sending all of your items down. I mean, I guess you could send both set items down and the items array down, and I could have gone down that path. But instead, I made more of a local function here called onNameChange, and I sent that function down. That function called onNameChange calls set items. Inside of set items, we have this different version of the map function. It's a little syntactically different, but it allows for this nice condensed shorthand that the other map function doesn't. The shorthand says, hey, take in one item at a time. Now, I didn't call it item. I started to call it item, but you notice the naming conflict, right? Take in one item at a time, so I just called that item X. Does X's ID match the item ID? If it does, then spread that item, right? So you got an object, spread the object, and change its name property to the new name. Otherwise, just return the item if the IDs don't match. So then I pass that onNameChange function down through props. Therefore, on the onChange handler for the control, we can change. We could call the onNameChange function that we created. Okay, obviously we have a little bit more work to do. This is not done, but we've done a whole lot in this video, and we're about an hour and 15 in, right? So we'll stop here for today and resume this tomorrow.